Revival. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Revival. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
The Revival Initiative. What's an initiative?
Hello, folks. It's Mike Ryan here, your host of the Revival Initiative. We're already on episode 12, and that's pretty darn awesome. Hope you're all well out there. Hope you're enjoying these videos and you're staying safe. Today we have a really special episode. It's all about sound design. And we have a great guest to talk to you about this, Aaron Collier. You may know Aaron from the bands Jimmy Swift or Scientists of Sound. Aaron is also a founding member of Heist Theatre. He's produced the shows The Princess Show, The Princess Rules, and The Waterford Boy. He's very successful in the music world, in the theatre world, and today he's going to talk to us all about sound design. So this is a really cool episode, some really interesting stuff we're all going to pick up on. Aaron is a brilliant musician, brilliant guy, and we're lucky to have him on board to pick his brain and learn what goes through there. So let's dive in deep. Let's get to know Aaron and get to know what he's all about. He's got a lot to teach us, and we got a lot to learn. So let's get her done. Woo!
The Revival Initiative.
Hi, I'm Aaron Collier, and I'm a composer and sound and projection designer and keyboardist and electronic music producer, playwright, stage performer, and drag artist here in Nova Scotia. Today, I want to share with you some of the key principles and components of my work as a sound designer.
What's sound design?
In live theater, I often tell people that what I do is the art of making choices about what the audience hears and how they hear it from the time they enter to the theater until they get the frig out after the play is done. So in a practical sense, it's usually about adding sound or music to transitions to cover the dead air while they move the set around. But in an artistic sense, it's more about communicating with the audience about what that time means. During that space when we're resetting, the characters are being changed. Time is passing in their world, and the story is being moved forward. Also in theater, as a designer, you're almost always working on a team. I have to consider what the lighting designer is thinking about the story, what the costume designer is thinking, the set designer, the projection designer. All of that comes into play, and you kind of want to be working in harmony with it to tell the same story. And it's the director's job to sort of lead all of these creative people in the same direction. Now, in music, it can be very similar. You're often working on a team, you're in a band, you're with an orchestra, and sometimes teams are really collaborative, in which case there's no clear leader and you all have to talk about what's happening so that you can be on the same page. And other times it's a clear hierarchical order and somebody is definitely the leader. But in any case, the goal is the same. You have to tell the story. Your job as a designer is to help the audience get closer to the story and to bring them from the beginning to the end and hopefully give them something along the way that enriches their experience of the story.
I love hats.
You have to wear two hats if you're going to be in this role. You have to wear an artist's hat and a designer's hat. So when you're wearing the artist's hat, your job is to rigorously pursue the truth about the story, about the characters, about their world, and ultimately about yourself. And if that sounds extraordinarily terrifying and excruciating, it is. It really is. I mean, there are breakthroughs and there are moments where you're elated with joy, but they're usually followed swiftly by incredibly acute moments of self-doubt. Mind you, it is worth going through this work. It is worth pursuing the truth relentlessly because you end up with better art and you end up maybe as a better person on the other end of the job. When you're wearing your designer's hat, you're pursuing nuance and beauty. You're really interested in the color of sound. You're really interested in the movement of sound. You're extremely interested in guitar pedals. You think that Kid A sounds amazing. In fact, the way it sounds might be more important than the songs itself. So you go back and forth between these two hats. First, you're pursuing the truth about the situation, the story, yourself, where you are in your life. How do you relate to this? Next, you go in as the designer and you play around in this world that you're discovering as an artist. As you play around and experiment, you put the artist hat back on, and the artist chooses which parts of that design illuminate the truth in the most remarkable or simple or relatable or clean way. Back and forth, two hats.
The 6 basic principles of sound design.
Okay, basics. Letter B, believe in the story. You could also replace story with song. Believe in the song. This was really good advice I received years ago. I was working on a play that I kind of didn't like, and I really wasn't enjoying it, and I wasn't able to turn out good work, and I was kind of dreading rehearsals. And then my partner gave me a great piece of advice, which I still use to this day when I find myself in similar situations. He said, "You have to find a way to love this." And he was so right. You have to find a way in. You need to find out which character is the one that I really relate to. Maybe it's the world the characters love in, that there's something about it that you really love. It's something that you can latch onto and say, that's where I'm going to focus my time and energy. That's what I'm going to bring to the table. Because ultimately, if you don't find a way in and a way to love the work that you're doing, you're sort of wasting your own time, and you're sort of wasting your team's time, and you're maybe wasting the audience's time. And that's bad. You shouldn't waste time.
A. Allow time and space.
Stories and plays and songs, they all unravel bit by bit. It's either when you're out walking or when you're sleeping or getting a good night's rest that more of the story and more of its depth is revealed to you. It's important to build that time into your process. John Cleese from Monty Python said, the first thing that creativity takes is time. So you have to set aside time, whatever that is, 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours. You have to set that time aside and say, that's the time that I'm going to use to work on this. Then the second thing that creativity takes is time. So within that time you've set aside, you need to have time to take that walk. You need to have time to aimlessly stare at the window. You need to have time to not take the first idea you came up with, because somewhere deep inside your bones you can sense that there's something else. You know that there's something, and you can feel it maybe. So you need the time to allow that to be processed to the top as unscathed as possible.
S. Start strong.
When I'm composing and designing for a theater show, I'll often start by composing a theme that's either based on the lead character's struggle or their secret struggle or one of the relationships in the play. Maybe it's based on the world that they inhabit or somehow capturing the essence of that world. Whatever my in was, whatever I decided that was what I was going to love about this work, that's where I go with the theme. And then I take that theme and I start to break it down and break it apart into components that I can then use as the basis for the design of the entire show. At this point at the beginning is not a good time to hold back. Now is a good time to fill up all of the spaces that you think your design can go. Either on paper when you're planning it out, or perhaps in actual life, you can just start putting sound everywhere. You don't want to hold yourself back. If you have bad ideas, now is the time. All the bad ideas, all of them.
I. Iterate your design.
Once you have a version of the design kind of all laid out, then it's good to go and put on your artist hat, zoom out and have a look at it and ask questions about it. What works? What doesn't work? What distracts you from understanding more about the story or the song? What feels clunky? What works incredibly well? All these are good questions. Once you have a series of notes about your work, put the designer's hat back on and then go in detail by detail from beginning to end. Do a whole second pass of it. Then you put your artist hat back on, zoom out and have a look, rinse and repeat.
C. Collaborate.
Let yourself be inspired by and influenced by your teammates or your collaborators and how they are telling the story and how they see it. Also, let them have honest reactions to what you're contributing to the story. Maybe you're adding a huge flourish to a moment and the rest of your team is really not doing anything to highlight that moment. So either they're thinking, well, we're going to leave all the space for Aaron because he's a diva and he needs all of it. Or they think that maybe it's best if that moment kind of flies under the radar. Maybe somewhere in the middle is right, but it's good to have conversations about what's really happening. If you get too precious about your design, you're going to end up fighting for your design instead of fighting for the story. So don't be afraid to kill your babies. Maybe that really cool, slick design you developed that highlights the time that the actor turns their head to the right while they're thinking isn't necessary. And while the sound is really cool, it just doesn't serve the story. So it's bad design and it's got to go. It's not personal, it's actually universal.
Yes, serve the story.
By now, you're probably sensing a really big theme here, and it's all about the story. So once your ideas have left your head and they're somewhere in the mix of your project, they really no longer belong to you. They belong to the story. So make sure you constantly keep going back and asking yourself the question, does this serve the story? Does it bring people closer in? Do you need to go back in and reiterate things? Do you need to go back in and do pass number 2? Have you talked to your collaborators about how they feel about the meaning or the journey of the song or the project? Maybe you need to go back in and adjust the details.
The 6 components of sound design.
When working with these 6 components, you always have 2 basic choices to make. You can either go with the main emotion of the song or the project or the scene, or you can work against that main emotion. Now, sometimes the choice is somewhere in the middle of those 2. Maybe it's closer to this side and that side, but it's good to be aware of those 2 opposing directions and good to know that you can make choices about which one you want to use.
Component 1, underscore.
This word really applies to theater and film and other art forms that use a score. It's kind of some sort of textural or musical or sonic element that's going to lie underneath a scene. And it's going to be underneath dialogue, maybe it's underneath action, maybe it's just underneath visuals. But it can really pull the audience and manipulate them to feel certain ways about that scene. For example, if I were to walk towards you in silence, it feels like this. If I were to do it again with a low frequency drone, it would feel like this. And if I were to do it one more time with a high frequency drone, it feels like this.
Shifts.
Shifts are kind of like the bridges between moments or scenes. Shifts say, look over here. They're kind of the separation between one moment and the next, and they can be between moments or scenes, but they're short. Okay, so imagine that when I look this way, I'm talking to my best friend about my job that I hate. And when I'm looking this way, I'm at my job that I hate. Kind of like this. Oh my God. My job is literally the worst. The customers are literally the worst. Actually, the worst. Hi. Oh, it's so nice to see you. The usual? This lady came in and she decided to harp on me about the details and how the details are important. She told me that I put the lids on crooked so the mouth hole is not centered over the logo on the cup. And I told her that her mouth hole was crooked. Oh, wow. Yeah, I never really thought about that detail. Thank you so much. You're a really great help to my life. I love you. This is also my acting reel.
Transitions.
Transitions are basically big shifts. So whereas the small shifts really say, look over here, transitions are more about picking somebody up, moving them through time and space, and then setting them down into a new scene. For instance, let's say that in our scene, the main character figures out that his parents are in the hospital right at the end of it. And then in the very next scene, he is at the hospital arguing with the front desk staff to let him in to see his parents, who are not letting him because it's too dangerous. So we need to get our audience out of the first scene. We need to maybe convey what is happening in between there, and then we need to set them down in the next scene. So one way to go about this, which would be going with the prevailing emotion of the scene, would be maybe to use a gradual sort of glitchy sound to shift them out of the first scene and kind of represent our character's world starting to crack and break down. Then we sort of want to build tension and sound and anxiety as we imagine that this person is racing to the hospital and their mind is racing and their anxiety is building. Then they're at the hospital and they're already amidst an argument that is escalating. So I don't want to set the audience down gently. I want to shove them through the door with urgency into the next scene. Sound is actually just your brain's interpretation of vibrating air molecules. So I think of atmosphere as charging the air with a certain kind of quality. A really good example of this is every space movie you've ever seen. When they're on the spaceship, the air has a certain feeling to it. There's a certain vibe of being in that ship. Anything that is weather related is also a good atmospheric change. So if it's raining in your scene, or if it's raining in your song, technological sounds, those type of things. So they can be practical in nature, but they can also be more artistic in nature, just there to add tension to the scene or to the track. In theater, you have to be careful because if actors have to raise their voice to talk over the atmosphere, it can get kind of fatiguing, and if your audience has to listen under the atmosphere to hear the story, you're sort of not doing your job. So in some cases, atmosphere can start at a certain level and then just kind of get out of the way. In theater, if you play the sound of rain, the audience is with you immediately. They get it. It's raining. They don't need to hear it constantly at that level for the rest of the scene. Similarly, when you're working with music, you can start off with sort of an ambient sample that sets the tone of your piece, and then you can kind of get it out of the way to make space for your instruments. If your track is too clean sounding, it needs some dust or some haze, try adding some ambience to it throughout. Now, in some cases, maybe the instruments you use or the effects you use or your recording equipment or the room you're in kind of come part and parcel with some sense of atmosphere. But if they don't, I've done things like I've put my handy recorder in the freezer, or I've put it inside a dumpster beside the highway. The entire world is actually just atmosphere, so try capturing some of it and using it.
Practical.
Practical sounds are just practical sounds. It's the telephone that rings in the scene. It's the sound of the car pulling up before the scene starts. It's the sound of the bell at the beginning of Metallica's For Whom the Bell Toll. And it is the kids at the beginning of MGMT's Kids. Practical sounds don't necessarily mean something other than what they mean. They just are what they are. Silence is powerful. Connections and relationships and moments and actions, they have vibrations that the audience and the listener can hear and feel. So sometimes using silence is the best choice. You always need to be aware that silence is part of your design, and you need to make the choices to use it. If your design doesn't use silence, make sure that's a choice as well, and make sure you chose that because it serves the story and it brings the audience in closer to that story. So that's been a look into the principles and elements and components that form the basis of my work as a sound designer. I hope that somewhere in there you've gleaned something, or there's some kind of tidbit that you can use to make your own work better.
The Revival Initiative!
Okay, welcome to Revival Revelations, the part of the episode where we dig deep with the artists to find a little bit more about them.
Revival Revelations.
Why is making music important to you?
Making music is important to me because music is important to me. It's been a formative experience of my entire life. I remember the first time I saw a piano, I was 2 years old. And since then, I've been convinced that there is some sort of magic creating power that exists in music.
What is one thing you know now but wish you knew when you first started your career in music?
I wish I knew that you didn't have to feel inspired to do your work. I often felt like I could only really do my thing when the juices were fully going and when I had those sort of glorious epiphany moments. But now I know that you can show up and you can do your work. And in fact, that you kind of have to. You kind of have to just practice going in there without feeling inspired and getting out of your own way. And then you kind of end up being inspired a lot more often, and you're able to sort of get your best work done despite not feeling inspired when you start.
Name a local artist who's inspired you and why.
So the person that comes to mind is a saxophonist and general multi-instrumentalist named Danny Oore. And he maybe lives in Toronto now. He might not be from Earth because he approaches things with such a wild and raw kind of creativity that really inspires me. One time when we were playing music together, we had our backs to each other and we were wearing headphones, and I could just hear this sort of like, we're using microphones and pedals and stuff, and I could just hear this wild sound that I'd never heard before. And so I turned around to see what it was, and it was Danny Oore playing music with a roll of packing tape. So I still think about that kind of creativity.
In what ways do you think we could strengthen our local music scene in Halifax?
Well, I mean, it certainly does come and go in waves, the local music scene. And now is kind of a weird time because the access to music is greater than ever. And it's cheap, and it's also really high quality in a lot of cases. You can get all sorts of music for $8 a month. So I think to strengthen our music scene, we need to pay attention to the entire experience that happens for people when they go to see live music. From the moment they walk into the venue, to how the show is set up, to how their time is respected before, during, and after it. You just want to give people something that is special because they were there in the room and because they were there all together. So I think strengthening the bonds between artists and venues and promoters to really work together on a team to create something to tell the same story is what we always should be trying to do.
Okay, name one local person, one local menu item, and one local album you'd like to bring with you on our next quarantine, if it ever happens. Hopefully not.
I'm going to take Mike MacDougall so that we can have endless philosophical debates and conversations. I'm going to take the tofu tinga tacos from Tako Loko on Isleville. And I'm going to take Welcome to the Night Sky by Wintersleep. It's going to be a good time.
Wow, I didn't know that many sounds existed in the world. Aaron sure showed us a lot with that. If you want to follow along with Aaron, be sure to get on his social medias, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Aaron also has a one-person show called Frequencies that'll be launching once this whole COVID-19 debacle is over. So, follow Aaron, follow us, the Revival Initiative, and follow the Inverness Ravens. Maybe the greatest Pee-wee hockey team that ever existed. They'd murder the Mighty Ducks. Just hand it to them. Just demolish them. They would mutilate the Mighty Ducks. The Inverness Ravens would. Beat them down! Oh yeah, they were good. A good team. Okay, people. Hope you're all well. Stay safe. And we'll see you tomorrow for the next episode. Cheers.
Revival. Whoa, whoa.